Chapter 16, Part 2. In this video, we'll be looking at sex differences in personality. First, temperament. Then we'll be looking at the 5-factor model, right? And what those personality dimensions tend to say as far as behaviors. And then we're looking at basic emotions and the differences between men and women, males and females, in basic emotions and if they're different. And then finally, there's a couple of other dimensions of personality and sex differences in those. So first of all, temperament in children. Now, temperament reflects emotional and behavioral consistencies that predict, in conjunction with other factors, patterns and life outcomes. Okay, so the important part here is that the child's temperament, how they act, indicates their emotional state, and it's also pretty consistent with their behaviors. Okay, and the reason it's of interest in children is because they haven't been socialized quite as much, right? So they're younger, and the assumption can be more readily sort of said that these sex differences could be driven more by biological factors. Okay, so let's see what it says. Largest meta-analysis of sex differences ever undertaken. Okay, 2006. So they had a bunch of kids age 3 to 13, and they measured them on many different levels, indicators. The biggest sex difference between boys and girls in this age group was inhibitory control. So D equals -0.41. Do you remember if it's got a D score of 1, 2, or 3, that's a small effect size, versus 4, 5, 6, which is moderate, and 7, 8, 9, which is a large effect size. Let me go back here and find this for you. There we go. Okay. Medium is around 5, large is 0.8, and that's 0.2. So a lot of the data that we're going to be looking at in this section of the chapter is going to be showing these effect sizes. So basically, this is moderate, okay, saying that girls have greater inhibitory control than boys. Impulsivity. Boys have less by a lot, 0.72. That is a lot. Than girls. Perceptual sensitivity, girls greater than boys, 0.38. It's just below medium. Surgency, so active behavior, approaching behavior, that is 0.38. Again, boys greater than girls. Physical aggression, that one, 0.60, which is quite strong. Okay. And then finally, negative affectivity. Overall they found no difference between boys and girls. And negative affectivity, when they measured it, they're looking at in terms of anger, difficulty, distress, and sadness. Okay. So the biggest difference is impulsivity. With boys greater than girls. And then inhibitory control, girls greater than boys, quite a bit. So here, that's the end of temperament. So here we're looking at the 5-factor model. So the 5 provides a framework for organizing sex differences in personality, data from 2 cross-cultural studies. They took all the data from 2 cross-cultural studies and combined them. They had self-report scores and they had observer report scores. Okay, so what you report about yourself in terms of extroversion, agreeableness, and aggressiveness versus what other people observe about you. And of course, there's going to be differences in some areas, right? So extroversion, women score higher on gregariousness, which 0.14, and activity level. It's a small difference. It's very small. Men score moderately higher on assertiveness, 0.5. That's quite strong. And excitement seeking, 0.38. One of the conclusions about this is studies that have found that men tend to place greater importance on the value of power than women do. That was their sort of explanation for that. Okay, so men significantly higher on assertiveness and somewhat higher on sensation seeking. What about sex differences and agreeableness? So, on the factor level, when you look at agreeableness overall, there's a small to medium effect size of women being more agreeable than men. But often in studies, what they'll do is, so agreeableness is the factor level, but within factor level, there's a lot of smaller pieces that go into it. So you can break it down, right? So under agreeableness is trusting and tender-minded, right? Whether they smile. So when you look at these individual items, what do we see? Well, A, women score higher on trusting and tender-minded. Tender-minded is huge. Negative 0.97, that's huge. Women smile more often than men. 0.6, very strong. They call into question situational factors. So there were some studies that were looking at situational factors and sex differences with men and women, and what they found is that women are more cooperative in mixed sex social interactions. They are. However, men are more cooperative than women in same-sex social interactions. So what this calls our attention to is the fact that the situation in which men and women are interacting make a big difference, right? At least in terms of agreeableness. This may reflect submissiveness and low status rather than agreeableness, right? Women often find themselves in lower power positions than males. That was their argument. Another difference is that men value social status and power more than women do. And then finally, there's some studies that they cited saying that women greater than men on agreeableness, studies ranging from 0.48 to 0.50. Okay, so I think overall we can say, yes, women score higher on agreeableness, definitely on tender-minded and smiling and trusting. And aggressiveness. This one is more clear-cut. Men are more physically aggressive, as assessed on personality tests, in fantasies, I found a D score for that, and manifest behavior, moderate to large effect sizes. They're largest for projective tests. Remember the TAT, where they're looking at the pictures, the ambiguous pictures, and you come up with a story or you come up with something. That is an effect size of 0.86, which is quite high. Peer report measures of aggression. So your peers measure males at a 0.63, which is quite high. And then look what it is for self-report. So D is 0.40. It is still moderate, right? But it is interesting. And this occurs on other things like empathy, aggression, different personality dimensions, where peer report is different from self-report. If you can think of why that is, aggressive males do not see themselves as aggressive necessarily to the extent that their peers do. Okay, so when you are measuring aggression, you can do self-reports, but it's often good to also do peer reports or observations to get a slightly more objective possible measure. Profound consequences for everyday life. The fact that males are significantly more physically aggressive than females. Men commit 90% of homicides worldwide. That is not just in North America. It is cross-cultural, across the world. Men commit more violent crimes of all sorts. The largest sex difference in violent crimes accompanies puberty. So this starts happening at adolescence, right? So I think it's around age 13, 14. That's when the sex differences in violence really takes off. After 50, violent crimes decline and men and women become much more similar. Cross-cultural finding: in all cultures with data, most killings and violent crimes are committed by men. Okay, so you can remember that the peak is early adolescence and goes through into the 20s, and then it evens out to be the same as men or women. Men and women are around the same after the age of 50. Some suggestion as to why. Women much more sensitive to punishment than men. D is 0.33. If women are more sensitive to punishment, then maybe they think about their actions, or maybe that curtails their actions more than it does males. Sex difference is referring to physical aggressiveness. So that's an important point to notice. Males are definitely more physically aggressive than females, but when it comes to other forms of aggression, like relational aggression, which is damaging relationships, right? So spreading rumors or aggressing against somebody by ruining their friendships or any kind of relationships that they have, that's relational aggression. And most research finds that males and females are either the same at relational aggression, and sometimes studies find that females are more relationally aggressive than males. Okay. So continuing on the 5-factor model, what does, in terms of conscientiousness, openness to experience, and emotional stability, sex differences. Conscientiousness: women score slightly higher on order, being more organized. Men and women tend to be very similar in conscientiousness. No significant difference on any facets. Okay, so conscientiousness, you can remember men and women equal. Same with openness to experience, no sex differences overall. The small details of the openness, like women have greater openness with feelings, whereas males have greater openness with ideas. Small difference on that. Cross-cultural study: adolescent girls greater than boys in openness to experience. So some studies find a small difference, but generally, no. So emotional stability and neuroticism, definitely a difference. Okay? Research consistently finds that women are greater than men on neuroticism in the moderate range. Men and women are similar on impulsiveness. Women score higher on anxiety, whether that's a self-report or observer report. This is the greatest difference. Do highlight this one. Women higher on anxiety. When it comes to anger or hostility or impulsiveness, it's inconsistent. Men and women not significantly different. Okay? So similar on impulsiveness, women score higher on anxiety. You can highlight that one. Now, we were just talking about emotional stability and anxiety and impulsiveness, and that's leading us into this difference, which is sex differences in depression. So evidence is that the rate of depression is increasing. 2015. So watch this short video, because the interesting thing is that in childhood, there is no sex differences in depression. These sex differences start around the age of 14. So let's watch this short video of what he has to say.
So there's a very important relationship between sex and many different kinds of emotional problems. So there is a higher rate of depression in women than in men. And we really only see that difference after puberty. So before puberty, depression is pretty rare, but when it happens, it tends to happen equally likely in boys and girls. Anxiety is in some ways similar to depression, but in other ways it's different. So the way that it is similar is that we do see higher rates of anxiety in girls than in boys. It's different from depression because we see that increase in girls even before puberty. So from really very early on, in the early school age years, anxiety tends to be more common in little girls than in little boys. That's not true of depression. By the time boys and girls become adolescents and go to high school or college, both anxiety and depression are more common in girls. And those findings have led some people to think, well, maybe anxiety comes before depression. And maybe one of the best ways to understand who's at most risk to become depressed is to understand how people become anxious.
Okay. Critical aspects of the sex differences in depression. What have they found? What have studies and research found about differences between males and females in depression? So DW, depressed women, they often report excessive eating and weight gain. So women tend to eat. Loss of appetite, still most common symptom for both sexes. Depressed women express their emotions and they confront their feelings, whereas males tend to become aggressive. Women are more likely to seek help, whereas men not as likely to seek help. They just tend to miss work more often and isolate themselves. Women tend to become, say, fidgety, whereas males tend to become inactive. Study found with university students that males socially withdraw using drugs, where depressed women experience hurt feelings and decline in self-esteem. Males more likely to die by suicide. Women more likely to make non-fatal suicide attempts. So the question there is, are they more likely to die by suicide because they use more violent means of suicide? Another important piece in this is rumination. Okay. Or to ruminate. I think we all do this sometimes. Ruminating means repeatedly focusing on one's symptoms or distress, thinking over and over about why something happened, right? So if you've ever had, maybe a really bad day or you did poorly on something and you're just going over in your head, what did you do wrong? You could have done this differently. Why didn't I do this? And you're just going over and over and over that in your head. It fails to lead to a solution. Rumination does not lead to a solution. It's just circling and circling and circling around the problem or the perception of failure or something like that. So they just re-experience it over and over and contributes to the perseverance of depressive symptoms. Research has found, however, that males greater than women greater than men, rumination is 0.24. So it's there, but obviously it's not the only factor. The largest and most consequential sex difference in personality is differences in depression. Next, we looked at emotions. Basic emotions, the frequency and intensity. Emotions, it's a huge part of personality, right? So, 2003 study, 8 fundamental emotions examined. So they looked at positive emotions and they looked at negative emotions. Positive emotions, affection, joy, contentment, and pride, and fear. Negative, fear, anger, sadness, and guilt. So they studied 9,000 people from over 41 countries. So again, it's an international study. And what did it say in terms of sex differences in emotions? Women experience women greater than men for all emotions. Okay, in terms of frequency and intensity. Affection and joy show the largest sex difference, with women experiencing affection and joy more than males. Pride, there's no difference. So in the positive emotions, across the board, women experience them more, frequency and intensity, and specifically affection and joy shows the largest. In terms of the negative emotions, fear and sadness, women greater than men. And then also guilt, women greater than men. On intensity, but in frequency is the same. So women feel guilty about as often as men do, but they experience it much more intensely. Men, the question down here, men don't experience emotions as frequently or as intensely as women do. More of a statement than a question. So, do they not experience them as much? Or what do social norms have to say, right? How males and females are socialized in terms of experiencing emotion and expressing emotion. Males and females have very different learning experiences in terms of that. Other dimensions of personality that we look at is self-esteem. So, do you remember I said back here, okay, so agreeableness at the factor level, and then there's this smaller pieces that fall under agreeableness. Well, they're looking at the same thing here. Global self-esteem is overall how you feel about yourself. Okay. It's central to mental health. It's just, what is the view you have of yourself, the feeling? It's global. They do have smaller, like academic self-esteem and many different sub areas of self-esteem. But what they're measuring here is global self-esteem. Overall, how do you feel about yourself? Sex differences result from meta-analysis. Across ages, effect is small. Males score higher than females, 0.21. Young children ages 7 to 10 show a slight difference. A lot of this is what we just heard in the video, right? As children age, the gap widens. 11 to 14, 0.23, and then you hit adolescent, and just like the doctor said, the gap increases quite a bit to 0.33. Once they hit adulthood, the gap again begins to close. Questions of why this might happen. They talk about idealized standards for how females should look, how they should behave. What is the impact of social media on self-esteem of males and females, but more specifically on females, right? We have 2 more dimensions, sexuality, and what else? People, things. 2 more dimensions. Sexuality and emotional investment, large sex differences in the desire for sexual variety. So, males, higher in almost all of the pieces we're going to talk about. So males' permissive attitudes around casual sex, higher than women. View pornography more often, 0.63. Number of lifetime sex partners desired, 0.87. Males greater than women, sexual fantasy, and more often accept offers from sex for strangers. Okay. And the good old question, can men and women ever just be friends? The data, the research sort of shows probably not completely. The research shows that men are more likely than women to initiate friendships with people they're sexually attracted to. They're more likely to become sexually attracted to a friend. And they're more likely to end the friendship if it doesn't result in sex at some point. And men greater than women to be sexually aggressive, pressure to have sex. Emotional investment, women greater than men in emotional investment. When they're saying emotional investment, they mean like loving, romantic, affectionate, compassionate. Okay? Now, from an evolutionary perspective, this does sort of make sense, right? Evolution of sex differences in attachment. Women do have the stronger attachment. They do have the stronger investment in a relationship, which is for the purpose of having babies. Whereas males, from an evolutionary perspective, is to procreate. I'm not suggesting it's necessarily that simple. I'm saying from an evolutionary perspective, that's how it would look. And then finally, the people things dimension. What are the differences between men and women on this particular dimension? Now, this dimension is looking at, they're saying there's some people are drawn towards jobs and careers and things they like to do, working with machines and tools, inanimate objects, working with things and figuring stuff out, right? Whereas other people like to work with people, and they prefer social occupations. They're caring about others or directing others. They're very, very social. They want to be and work with people. There's a very strong sex difference in terms of this, where males are greater than females, effect size of 1.35, which is huge. Other research around this area, when females were asked to describe themselves. Do you remember that survey I put at the very beginning? I think it was the 20 question. You say, I am, right? And you list 20 ways that you describe yourself. In a test that was similar to that, when females are asked to describe themselves, they're more likely than boys to make references to relationships, more likely to value personal qualities linked to group harmony, right? So sensitivity and trusting and warmth and love. They're more likely to identify their personal relationships as central to their identity. I'm a sister, I'm a mother, than males do. And then finally, this is very similar, this people, things, dimension is very similar to the empathizing versus systematizing view of sex differences, the differences between males and females. Whereas empathizing is tuning into other people's thoughts and feelings. Women engage in empathizing more than men do. Men greater than women for systematizing, so drive to comprehend how things work. Okay, again, all of these things, not necessarily saying there's a biological difference, have to always consider socialization in the findings. Okay, that is the end of part 2, sex differences in personality. And we will do part 3 in the next video. See you there.